You are here for a simple explanation on stats. Let's get right to it. Look, I understand how it is. You're a new player, you see 8 stats, and you're like, what do I do? Now, you might be overly afraid to make the wrong decisions. So if you are at the point where you're leveling up and you're afraid to spend your stats, we are going to break this down into 2 panic stats that are going to make it incredibly easy for you. The first and absolute most important panic stat, I cannot advise this enough, is Vigor. You should be thinking of Vigor as a mandatory stat. And I know that sounds crazy, but especially as a newer player, I would even say for veteran players, Vigor is an absolute must-have whenever you're adventuring in this game. I know you're thinking, well, what about strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith, arcane? Obviously, all of these are going to be important, right? Well, as a beginning player, you are only worried about these stats when you want to meet the stat requirement of a weapon or spell if you're a magic user. Unless you are trying to meet the requirement of a weapon or spell, you should not be pumping into these stats thinking that it's going to make a drastic difference on your character. Don't worry about damage. Your main damage is going to come from weapon upgrades. If you're worried about progressing too far and doing minimal damage to enemies, worry about your upgrades more than your stats, because your stats aren't doing as much for you as you think they are. Aside from upgrades, you can further make up for stats just by putting on Ashes of War that add extra bonuses like Bleed, Frost, Holy, or whatever additional damages you want to your weapon. Anytime I'm summoned or watching streams of newer players, I see way too many people that have just put no stats into their Vigor at all. At early game levels 25 to 35, you are going to want a minimum of 30 to 35 Vigor. At around mid-game, level 50-ish, you are going to want a minimum of around 45 Vigor. When you're approaching the end game, you really want to be as close to this hard cap as you can, if not hitting the hard cap of 60 Vigor. Now, why am I saying stop at 60 specifically, and what do I mean by hard cap? To explain this, we're going to have to briefly go over soft caps and hard caps. Now, what are soft caps? What are hard caps? They sound complicated, but it's really simple. Soft caps and hard caps kind of force players to split up their stats a little bit and not just be a one-trick pony. Hard cap essentially means you never, ever want to go over this number. Think of the hard cap as your final level into any stat. Soft caps, it's fine to go over. Hard caps, do not go over it. Now, the soft caps and hard caps for stats in Elden Ring are ridiculously high. For strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith, and arcane, the number you have to worry about going over is 80, which is such a high number that you don't have to worry about going over it. The only caps we need to worry about as a new player are the caps for Vigor, endurance, and mind if you're a magic user. As a newer player, it's not going to be life or death. It doesn't matter if we're perfectly optimal. Do not think too much on it. Now, your second panic stat is endurance. Now, don't make the mistake I did. So I looked at my endurance bar at the beginning of the game. I see it hardly going down anytime I'm rolling or attacking. And I think to myself, why would I ever invest in this stat? Like, having 14 feels like so much. Like, I don't need this stat. I could put it into damage or whatever else. You're not investing in this stat for the stamina bar necessarily. The extra hits and rolls alone is a good enough reason for it to be a panic stat number 2. What you're really investing for is the equipment load. This equipment load you get from endurance allows you to wear any and every armor that comes your way while still keeping your fast roll. This is important, especially if you are using a shield or dual wielding. This gives you leeway to absorb enemy hits through a mechanic known as poise, while still getting out your attacks and not needing to worry too much about perfect positioning at all times. Keeping your fast roll is important. Even if you plan on hiding behind a shield most of the game, I'd highly advise against topping out your weight load to heavy and ignoring the roll entirely. Put points into endurance. You can still wear heavy armor while still having access to your ridiculously good invincible roll. This will get you out of so many situations. Trust me, you need it. Don't worry about any permanent mistakes while you're in the first quarter of the game pumping into health. There's an item in the game known as larval tears, which lets you completely reallocate your stats. If you're worried about not having enough, look up a YouTube guide on larval tear location. There will be many that you can easily get in a heartbeat. Like the video, subscribe if you like the content. Have a good one.